In this video, I will be discussing two important elements that led to the quasi-war between the French and the Americans that took place from 1798 to 1800. Prior to discussing these two elements, I would like to give a little background as how they came to be. The first two elements tie back to the Revolutionary War that took place between 1775 and 1783. The war was concluded with the Treaty of Paris, a treaty that stated America deserved to be its own nation independent from Britain. This meant that Britain had to remove all royal troops from the new nation's territory. Even though a treaty was made between the two nations, America was a new nation and had its own challenges. These challenges include national debt, expansion of land and power, as well as international affairs. The only challenge I am going to focus on is international affairs. You see, after the Revolutionary War, George Washington was inaugurated as the first president of the United States. He served his term adequately and productively. Then, when his term was over, Washington stated that America should try and stay out of international affairs. But of course, that did not happen. John Adams was elected as president in 1796, which leads us to the two elements that led up to the quasi-war. Now, before I go into Adams' presidency and the two elements, you must know that there was tension between America and France because of Jay's Treaty. Jay's Treaty was a treaty that made Britain remove all troops from America by 1796. The treaty also allowed small American ships to have access to British West Indian markets in exchange for bargaining away U.S. rights to load certain products from French colonies during wartime. Now keep in mind that the French were already a little mad at the Americans because of this treaty. With Adams as the new president, Congress was dominated by Federalists, and tensions between the French and America rose. Then the French eventually said enough is enough and started seizing American ships carrying goods to British ports. John Adams responded by sending a peace commission to Paris with the hopes to avoid war. The French responded to the peace commission is the first element that led to the quasi-war. The first element was the XYZ affair. This took place in 1798. The foreign minister of the French, Charles J. Talleyrand, chose not to meet with the peace commission and instead sent agents X, Y, and Z to demand certain conditions be met before they spoke. The agents were Jean Hottinger, also known as Agent X, Pierre Bellamy, also known as Agent Y, and Lucien Hautenval, also known as Agent Z. Talleyrand demanded that he receive $250,000 and France receive a loan of $12 million before negotiating peace. Americans were shocked and infuriated with France's request for a bribe. Republicans felt as if this affair disgraced their foreign policy laws, while Federalists got ready to go to war. With citizens and officials ready to go to war, John Adams responded to the XYZ affair by joining Britain in a trade agreement with François-Dominique Toussaint Louverture. Louverture was a former slave that led an independence movement that controlled most of Saint Dominique. This allowed American trade and commerce in the Caribbean. Now, this did not stop France from attacking American ships, but France did not know that Congress also armed 54 ships to protect American commerce. This caused naval confliction between France and America. The conflict led to the increase in tension between the two nations, and war began to seem inevitable. But the XYZ affair was not the only element that led to the quasi-war. With Congress anticipating war with the French, there were certain measures that were taken into America to ensure national security. These measures are also considered the second element that led to the quasi-war. The second element is the Alien and Sedition Acts. These were 4 acts passed in 1798 by the Federalist-dominant Congress for the purpose of national security. The first act was the Alien Enemies Act. This act authorized the jailing or deporting of French spies. Now, you are probably wondering how officers determined if someone was a spy in the 18th century. The answer is there was no clear way of determining who was a spy and who was not. This meant that all French immigrants were targeted and considered suspicious. But this act was not all that bad, because it would only be put into effect if Congress declared war. The next act was the Alien Friends Act. This act gave the president the power to expel any foreign resident whose actions or activities were considered suspicious or dangerous. Even if someone was not acting suspiciously, the fact that they were an immigrant made them suspicious and possibly dangerous. Republicans used this act as a means of deporting immigrants that were critical of Federalist policies. This made it worse for French immigrants because now they were also targeted by the President of the United States. Of course, this was all to help the greater good and ensure national security, but not being welcomed into your new home must be a pretty terrible feeling. The third act was the Naturalization Act. This act increased the required amount of years of residency for U.S. citizenship. The previous amount of years, that was 5, was now moved to 14 years. This act was meant to reduce the amount of Irish voting. The last act was the Sedition Act. Now, this act was meant for all citizens, no matter what their background was or where they came from. This act prohibited citizens from violating the laws passed, as well as prohibiting them from any attempt to overthrow the government. Another part of the act was that you could not speak, write, or print anything poorly about the president. Citizens then started turning on each other, accusing one another of sedition. These 4 acts were the second element that gave even more fuel to the tension between the two nations. The XYZ affair and the Alien and Sedition Acts were 2 elements that increased tensions between France and the United States of America that led to the Quasi-War that lasted from 1798 to 1800.